Buju, wago shindagu minawa migazi and dodem, gazagaskwa jimekag indun jiba. Hello, my name is Anton Treuer. My native name is Wagosh, which means fox, and I come from Leech Lake, which is one of the reservations in northern Minnesota. I'd like to talk to you all today a little bit about the importance of addressing racial equity in the workplace. There are many, many reasons why this is important, but in this day and age, there's quite a bit of pushback to even addressing the topic. I think some white Americans are a little afraid of white erasure and retreat from these conversations without really thinking through all of the implications. The first I'd like to share with you is simply in a business sense. If you look at the S&P 500 back in 1980, half of those companies don't even exist today. They are completely out of business. At the same time, the stock market has gone up and up and up and up. Only half of those companies from 1980 are still here. So, looking around today at the businesses, nonprofit organizations, and even colleges and universities, in the future, decades from now, a great many of those will not be here. They will not be in existence. But some will, and there will be more humans on the planet and more demand for businesses, products, services, and education than ever before. The question then becomes, to be a viable business, nonprofit, or educational institution, what do we need to pay attention to stay relevant and relatable to the people that we would like to recruit to come through the door? And this is one of the first reasons why paying attention to racial equity is so important. Already, right now, the majority of the K-12 students in the United States of America are students of color. That is who's here. And it doesn't really matter, Democrats or Republicans, build a wall, don't build a wall, whatever happens with immigration policy and so forth, that is who is already here. Even if the US border were somehow sealed and there's not a single human being who immigrates here, the folks who are here with their reproductive patterns and everything else make it clear that America will be majority minority. And there's nothing that can be done to stop that. Most of the solutions, as a side note, are kind of silly. Most of the so-called illegal immigrants come by airplane. Build a wall. If America turning brown is the sinking of the Titanic, well, we hit that iceberg ages ago. Rearrange the furniture all you want. If you want to be one of those businesses, nonprofits, or educational institutions that is thriving decades from now, the solution is to build the products, services, culture, and competency that the majority of your potential clients and students will be looking for. That means paying attention to race and racial equity. It's just good business sense. For many decades, the Black community in America petitioned the government and the nonprofit sector to build a museum about the Black experience on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and struggled for a long time to get any kind of traction. So, some entrepreneurial folks got busy developing a capital campaign and funded and built the Black Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. It was so popular that they've been filled to capacity for 3 years in a row. And if you want to go to the museum, you should make sure you get your tickets several months in advance. It's not just that Black people want to learn about their own experience and their own contributions to making this country an amazing place. The people who built the Black Holocaust Museum built a deliverable, a set of products and services that people were interested in participating in. And I think most museums in the United States of America would be thrilled beyond measure and maybe would have a hard time imagining being filled to capacity for 3 years in a row. If something's working, we should all pay more attention to that. In Canada, coming out of their Truth and Reconciliation Commission were a number of findings, including that the Canadian government had engaged in cultural genocide against Indigenous people. And among the many things that have happened in response to that, in the interests of restorative justice, included the creation of Canada's National Museum of Human Rights located in Winnipeg, Manitoba. It's a remarkable museum. There are 4 floors, and the first floor included a series of pods where I think just about everybody in Canada could see themselves represented somehow. There was one pod that was about the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses in Canada. I had no idea that the Jehovah's Witnesses were persecuted in Canada, but they were. There was another one about the internment of Japanese Canadians during World War II. I always knew about the American experience interning Japanese citizens during World War II. I had no idea it happened in Canada too, but it did. There was, of course, a section on the residential boarding schools and the treatment of Indigenous people and many other things. And by the time anybody went through that whole exhibit, they saw themselves reflected and their story reflected in there somehow. The second story was all about the human experience with things like genocide. There was a lot about World War II and the Nazi Holocaust, and a number of other famous chapters in genocide. The third floor was all about famous efforts to rectify historical injustice. So there was stuff on Gandhi, there was stuff on Martin Luther King Jr., and so forth. And the fourth floor was all about the visitor, where it said, do you see a story here that you want to get involved with? Do you want to make a difference? Sign up now, get on the newsletter, volunteer to participate. Do you have a story that is not reflected in this museum? You can tell your story right now and it will become part of the national record. And so the museum took you from seeing yourself to seeing the big patterns, to seeing and believing in change, to being the change. It was well designed. And you know what? Telling all of these stories, good, bad, and ugly, well, it didn't diminish the greatness of Canada. It made it more great. Sharing this diversity of stories did not take away from the sharing of white history or stories about white people struggling in Canada too. In fact, it got so many more people in the door that folks like me were learning about the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses that I might not have otherwise had any inclination to become aware of. Even beyond having a sound business plan, we should also see and recognize the humanity of all of our citizens, of our neighbors. Learn about one another's stories, histories. In the Book of Forgiving by Desmond Tutu, he talks about what healing and forgiving and reconciliation really look like. And he says there's really 4 things we need to do. The first is we need to tell the story. Everyone needs to be heard and validated. And sometimes we need to tell a story multiple times. We need to tell it and retell it, and even shape the telling and reshape the telling of the story. And when that happens, we should name the hurt. Say, hey, this was genocide, or whatever it happened to be. Then we can forgive. And then we can decide, are we going to renew or release the relationship? Efforts to stifle the telling of the story blunt that healing process and keep marginalized groups stuck in grief and anger as a manifestation of grief, and inhibit a true reconciliation. You can't get to reconciled and skip the reconciling. We all have a part to play in the effort, but leaning in to equity is sound business practice and good humanity. Miigwech, thank you. Thanks for watching today. I'm Anton Treuer. Let's keep in touch. I'm active on social media, and my website has lots of information on my books, speaking engagements, free Ojibwe language resources, resources for teachers, and more. Miigwech.